I'm August, 67 years old, and retired after 42 years, sorting mail for the Postal Service. My peaceful retirement shattered when my son Thomas and his wife Amanda moved in temporarily 18 months ago. The tension in my home grew unbearable, culminating in a family dinner where they demanded half my pension. What they never expected was my response when I stood up from that table. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand your ground with family. Now, let me tell you how it all began. I started working for the Postal Service right out of high school in 1973. The pay wasn't great, but the benefits were good, and I knew that if I stayed long enough, I'd have a pension to rely on in my old age. I met Diana when I was 23, delivering mail to the florist shop where she worked. She had the most beautiful smile I'd ever seen, and within a year, we were married. Thomas came along 2 years later, our only child. Diana and I weren't rich, but we made do with what we had. Our little house in the suburbs of Portland wasn't fancy, but it was ours. We planted a cherry tree in the backyard when Thomas was born. Diana said it would grow alongside our son. Life was good until Thomas turned 8. Diana started getting these headaches. At first, we thought it was just stress or maybe she needed glasses. By the time we got the cancer diagnosis, it was already stage 4. She was gone within 6 months, leaving me to raise our son alone. Those years were tough. I'd wake up at 4:30 every morning to get Thomas's lunch ready before my shift. My mother would watch him after school until I got home. I'd help with homework, make dinner, and try my best to be both mother and father to a boy who missed his mom terribly. I never remarried. There were a couple of women I dated over the years, but no one ever measured up to Diana. Besides, Thomas became my whole world. I wanted to give him everything Diana would have wanted for him. When Thomas showed an interest in computers in middle school, I took on extra shifts to buy him his first desktop. It wasn't top of the line, but seeing his face light up on Christmas morning was worth every extra hour on my feet. By high school, Thomas was a straight-A student. His guidance counselor said he had a real shot at a good college. College tuition wasn't something I had planned for when Diana was alive. My postal salary was enough for us to live comfortably, but saving for college seemed like a luxury we couldn't afford. When Thomas got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic but terrified about the remaining costs. I refinanced the house, took out loans, cut back everywhere I could. No vacations, no new clothes, no eating out. I drove the same old Chevy for 15 years, patching it up whenever it broke down rather than buying a new one. Some months I had to choose between paying the electric bill and putting gas in the car. But I never let Thomas know how tight things were. I wanted him to focus on his studies, not worry about money. Thomas thrived at Northwestern. He majored in computer science and landed internships at tech companies during the summers. We talked every Sunday night, and he'd tell me about his classes, his friends, and his dreams of working in Silicon Valley. I was so proud of him, watching him become the man Diana would have wanted him to be. During his junior year, Thomas met Amanda at a campus event. From the photos he sent, she was pretty with long blonde hair and a confident smile. When he first mentioned her, his voice changed. I could tell she was special to him. They started dating seriously, and by senior year, Thomas was talking about their future together. I finally met Amanda at Thomas's graduation. She was polite but reserved around me. When Thomas wasn't looking, I caught her eyeing my worn suit and scuffed shoes. I felt a twinge of something then, but I brushed it aside. Thomas was happy, and that was all that mattered. After graduation, Thomas got a job at a tech startup in Seattle. The salary was impressive, more than I'd ever made at the Postal Service. Amanda, who had studied marketing, found work at a small advertising agency. They rented a fancy apartment downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Space Needle. I retired the year after Thomas graduated, at 62. My pension wasn't huge, but combined with Social Security and the modest savings I'd managed to put aside, I had enough to live comfortably. I sold our family home in Portland, which had appreciated nicely over the years, and bought a smaller two-bedroom ranch house in a quiet neighborhood about 30 minutes outside of Seattle. I wanted to be closer to Thomas, my only family. The first few years of my retirement were peaceful. I started a small vegetable garden in the backyard, joined a local fishing club, volunteered at the community center teaching kids how to play chess. Thomas and Amanda would visit once a month or so, though the visits always seemed rushed. They were busy building their careers, and I understood that. Looking back now, I see the warning signs I missed. The way Thomas would casually mention expensive restaurants they'd tried, or the luxury vacations they took. How Amanda would comment on my quaint little house or simple lifestyle. The way they never seemed to have money saved despite their high incomes. But at the time, I was just happy to see my son living a life I could never provide for him. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March 2 years ago. Thomas's voice sounded strained over the phone. His company had gone through a sudden round of layoffs, and he'd been let go along with half his department. They had 3 months of severance, but with Seattle's high cost of living, they were worried about making rent. To make matters worse, Amanda's advertising agency had recently cut her hours to part-time. Their lease was ending in 30 days, and they were considering moving to a cheaper apartment further from the city. "Dad," Thomas said hesitantly, "I hate to ask this, but is there any chance we could stay with you for a little while? Just until I find another job. 3 months tops, I promise." How could I say no to my only child? The house had a spare bedroom that was sitting empty, except when Thomas and Amanda visited. It would be tight with 3 adults, but it was doable. Besides, I secretly looked forward to having company. Sometimes the silence in the house got too heavy, especially in the evenings when I'd find myself talking to Diana's photo, just to hear a voice. "Of course you can stay here," I told him, "as long as you need." They arrived 2 weeks later with 4 suitcases, 3 boxes of kitchen gadgets, and their 2 cats. I helped them convert the spare bedroom into their space, moving my fishing gear and old photo albums to the garage. Amanda seemed disappointed by the size of the closet, but Thomas gave me a grateful hug. "We won't be a burden, Dad," he promised. "We'll help with chores and cooking. You'll hardly notice us." The first month went surprisingly well. Thomas spent his days applying for jobs online and going to networking events. Amanda worked remotely 3 days a week and helped keep the house tidy. We ate dinner together most nights, and I enjoyed having people to talk to. Thomas even joined me for fishing one Saturday, something we hadn't done since he was a teenager. But as the weeks stretched into months, subtle changes began to appear. Thomas's job search became less intense. He started sleeping later, spending more time playing video games and less time on applications. When I gently asked about his progress one evening, he became defensive. "The tech job market is brutal right now, Dad. You don't understand how it works. I can't just walk into the post office and get hired like in your day." That stung, but I let it go. I didn't want to add to his stress. Amanda's presence in the house grew more dominant. She rearranged the kitchen cabinets without asking, claiming the old arrangement was inefficient. She bought expensive organic groceries and seemed annoyed when I mentioned the cost. When I made my usual tuna casserole one night, she picked at it and later ordered takeout. "We're just used to different foods," she explained, not quite meeting my eyes. 3 months came and went. Then 6. There was always a reason they couldn't move out yet. The job market was still tough. They were saving for a deposit. They'd found a place, but it fell through. I tried to be patient, remembering all the times I'd struggled as a young man and how grateful I would have been for help. But increasingly, I felt like a guest in my own home. Thomas and Amanda took over the living room most evenings with their shows on my TV. They used my car without asking, sometimes returning it with an empty tank. Their cats scratched my furniture, and when I mentioned it, Amanda suggested I buy new pieces more cat-friendly. The utility bills doubled, then tripled. The water bill spiked because of Amanda's long showers. The electric bill soared from the constant use of electronics. The grocery bill became unrecognizable, as Amanda insisted on specialty items I'd never bought before. I dipped into my savings to cover the increased expenses, telling myself it was temporary. But as 1 year turned into 18 months, with no sign of them moving out, I began to worry. My retirement fund wasn't unlimited, and at this rate, I'd burn through my safety net within a few years. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront Thomas. He was my son, my only child, Diana's boy. How could I tell him he was becoming a financial burden? What kind of father would that make me? Instead, I tried smaller approaches. I mentioned a fishing trip I was planning with my buddies, hoping it might prompt them to discuss their own plans. Thomas just asked if they could use the house for a party while I was gone. I left budget spreadsheets visible on the kitchen table. They disappeared under piles of Amanda's magazines. The final straw came when I found Diana's gardening journal, one of my most treasured possessions, moved from my nightstand to a box in the garage. When I asked Thomas about it, he shrugged. Amanda needed space for her skincare products. We figured you didn't need that old book out since you don't really garden anymore. That night, I canceled my fishing trip. I couldn't afford it anyway, not with the extra $300 I'd spent on household expenses that month. As I sat alone on the back porch, looking at Diana's cherry tree, now tall and strong, I realized something had to change. By the 15-month mark of their temporary stay, the atmosphere in my home had become unbearable. What had started as minor irritations grew into daily conflicts, often unspoken but felt deeply. My morning routine, once peaceful and predictable, became a careful navigation around Thomas and Amanda's sleep schedule. "Could you try to be quieter in the kitchen?" Amanda asked one morning, appearing in her silk pajamas at 10:30. Some of us work from home and need our sleep. I had been making coffee at 7, as I had every morning for decades. Now I felt like an intruder in my own kitchen, tiptoeing around to avoid disturbing the royal couple. The spare bedroom had transformed entirely into their domain, with expensive bedding and framed art I didn't recognize hanging on the walls. They had replaced the reading lamp I'd used for 20 years with a modern monstrosity that looked like twisted metal. When I mentioned I missed my old lamp, Thomas rolled his eyes. "Dad, that thing was ancient. We're actually improving your house. You should be thanking us." Their presence expanded beyond the bedroom. Amanda's yoga mat permanently occupied a corner of the living room. Thomas's gaming setup dominated the dining table, making it impossible to use for actual dining. My recliner, where I used to read the newspaper every evening, was now invariably occupied by one of their cats, and I was made to feel guilty if I tried to reclaim it. "Whiskers is finally comfortable," Amanda would say reproachfully. "Can't you sit somewhere else?" Somewhere else, in my own home. My routines and preferences were gradually erased. The thermostat was perpetually set 4 degrees higher than I liked, sending my utility bills soaring. The refrigerator filled with almond milk and kale smoothies, crowding out my simple foods. The shower drain clogged regularly with Amanda's long blonde hair. More distressingly, my connection with Thomas deteriorated. The son who once called me his hero now seemed embarrassed by my existence. When his tech friends came over, he introduced me dismissively as my dad without using my name, then steered the conversation away from any mention of my postal career. "Dad doesn't get the whole startup culture," he'd say, sharing a knowing look with his friends. I found myself spending more time in my bedroom or garage, the only spaces still somewhat mine. I'd look at old photos of Thomas as a boy, his gap-toothed smile and trusting eyes, and wonder where that child had gone. Financial pressures mounted relentlessly. Thomas and Amanda contributed nothing to household expenses, not even token amounts for the utilities they used extravagantly. When the water heater broke, requiring a $900 emergency replacement, I had to withdraw from my modest emergency fund. Thomas vaguely mentioned paying me back when things turn around, but never did. Meanwhile, their spending on themselves continued unabated. New clothes arrived in Amazon packages almost daily. Amanda's collection of expensive skincare products expanded across the bathroom counter. Thomas bought a $2,000 gaming computer, setting it up in the dining room with a casual, finally got a good deal online. I tried gentle approaches to establish boundaries. One evening, after finding my car again, returned with an empty tank, I suggested we create a schedule for shared resources. Maybe we could have a system for the car, I ventured carefully over dinner. And perhaps a contribution toward groceries and utilities? Thomas looked up from his phone with irritation. Seriously, Dad? We're family. Are you really going to nickel and dime us when we're struggling? We're not asking for handouts, Amanda added, her voice dripping with wounded dignity. We thought you wanted to help us. Guilt crashed over me like a wave. Was I being petty? Diana would have wanted me to support our son unconditionally. But would she have approved of this arrangement, where Thomas took and took without appreciation or reciprocation? One Saturday, I discovered all of Diana's cherished rose bushes had been removed from the garden. In their place was a new seating area with expensive outdoor furniture I didn't recognize. Surprise, Amanda said, gesturing grandly when I stood frozen in the doorway. We've upgraded your sad little garden. Those old rose bushes were dying anyway. They weren't dying. I had tended those roses for 30 years, varieties Diana had lovingly selected. Every spring they bloomed in a riot of color that kept her memory alive. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly. A thank you would be nice, Thomas replied sharply. Those chairs cost a fortune. Where are the roses? I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay calm. We composted them, Amanda said with a shrug. They were taking up useful space. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom looking at Diana's photo. What would you do? I whispered to her smiling image. Where did we go wrong with him? The next morning, I found a brochure for assisted living facilities on the kitchen counter. When I asked Thomas about it, he looked uncomfortable. Amanda and I were just thinking long-term, he said, not meeting my eyes. This house is pretty big for just one person, once we move out. And those places have activities, people your own age. I was 67, in excellent health, and had a wide circle of friends in the community. The implication was clear. They were eyeing my house once I was out of the way. The final insult came when I planned to host my retirement group for our monthly poker game. I'd mentioned it 2 weeks in advance, asking if Thomas and Amanda could give us the living room for one evening. The day of the gathering, I came home from grocery shopping to find Amanda hosting a sound bath healing circle in my living room. 6 strangers sat cross-legged on my carpet, eyes closed, while someone played crystal bowls. We can't reschedule, Amanda whispered when I stood dumbfounded in the doorway. Everyone has paid a non-refundable fee. I had to call my friends and cancel. As I sat in my car in the driveway, feeling displaced from my own home, I realized I couldn't continue like this. Something had to give. That evening, as I microwaved a frozen dinner in the kitchen while Thomas and Amanda ordered expensive sushi delivery, my old friend Frank called. Why'd you cancel poker night? He asked. We were looking forward to taking your money. I found myself confessing everything. The financial strain, the disrespect, the gradual takeover of my home and life. August, Frank said firmly. Using my full name like he did when we were serious, you're being taken advantage of. It's time to stand up for yourself before you have nothing left to stand up with. His words echoed in my mind as I lay awake that night. Diana would have wanted me to help Thomas, yes. But would she have wanted me to be a doormat? To enable behavior that was making our son less responsible, not more? The next morning, Thomas announced he wanted to have an important family meeting over dinner that evening. From his tone and Amanda's smug expression, I sensed something significant was coming. Little did I know how that dinner would change everything. When Thomas mentioned a family meeting, a small part of me dared to hope. Perhaps he'd finally found a job. Maybe they were announcing plans to move out. I wanted to believe my son had turned a corner, that our relationship could be restored to what it once was. I decided to make it special. I spent the afternoon preparing Diana's famous pot roast, Thomas's favorite childhood meal. I set the table with the good dishes, the ones Diana and I had received as wedding gifts and used only for special occasions. I even bought a bottle of wine, stretching my increasingly tight budget. As I chopped vegetables for the roast, memories flooded back. Thomas at 10, eagerly helping me peel carrots for this same dish. Thomas at 16, wolfing down seconds and thirds after winning his first chess tournament. The recipe was a connection to happier times, to the family we once were. By 6 o'clock, the house smelled wonderful. I'd just taken fresh rolls from the oven when Thomas and Amanda emerged from their room. They were dressed unusually formally for a home dinner. Thomas wore a button-up shirt I'd never seen before, and Amanda had on a sleek black dress with jewelry that glinted in the light. "Something smells good," Thomas commented, though his smile seemed rehearsed. "Your mother's pot roast," I replied, hoping to spark a warm memory. "Remember how you used to request it for every birthday?" "Oh, that's nice," he said distractedly, checking his phone. Amanda glanced at the table setting with a slight frown. "We thought about ordering in from that new French bistro for our meeting. This seems so heavy." I swallowed my disappointment. "Well, it's ready now. Shall we sit down?" Dinner began awkwardly. Thomas and Amanda exchanged glances but ate little. They sipped the wine I'd bought, while I tried to make conversation about a neighbor's new puppy, the upcoming community festival, anything to break the strange tension. Finally, after picking at his barely touched pot roast, Thomas cleared his throat. "Dad, we wanted to talk to you about something important, about the future." He reached for Amanda's hand across the table, and she gave him an encouraging nod. "Amanda and I have been discussing our situation," he continued, his voice taking on a formal tone. I recognized from his college presentations. "We've been here for over a year now, and it's clear that the job market isn't going to improve dramatically anytime soon." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. Was this finally about finding work elsewhere, moving to a more affordable city? "We've been contributing to this household in non-financial ways," Thomas continued. "Amanda has improved the decor and garden. I've updated your ancient technology. We've brought life and energy to this place." I bit my tongue, thinking of Diana's composted roses and my displaced belongings. But the reality is, housing costs are prohibitive everywhere. Even if I find a job tomorrow, starting over from scratch is nearly impossible in today's economy. Amanda jumped in, her voice smooth and practiced. "What Thomas is saying is that we need to consider more permanent arrangements that benefit everyone. A true family solution." My stomach tightened. This wasn't heading where I'd hoped. Thomas pulled out his tablet and opened a spreadsheet. "We've analyzed the household finances based on what we could find in your statements." "You went through my financial statements?" I interrupted, shocked. "They were in your desk drawer," Amanda said dismissively. "We needed to understand the full picture." Thomas continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Based on our calculations, your postal pension, Social Security, and savings give you more income than you realistically need for one person. Meanwhile, Amanda and I are struggling to restart our careers." He turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a detailed breakdown of what he estimated was my monthly income, with a large portion highlighted. "Our proposal is simple and fair," Thomas said, his voice confident now. "We'll make this living arrangement permanent. We'll take the master bedroom since there are two of us, and you can have the guest room." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. "In exchange," he continued, "you'll add our names to the house deed as co-insurance that we all have security, and you'll allocate 50% of your monthly pension to a joint account for household expenses, which we'll manage," Amanda added quickly. Since we understand modern banking better, I felt as if I'd been punched in the stomach. The pot roast, made with such hope and love, sat heavy and cold before me. "You're living here rent-free," Thomas said, his voice hardening. "It's only fair you give us half your pension. After all, we're family." Amanda nodded in agreement, her eyes calculating. "It's the sensible solution. Multi-generational living is the future." I looked at my son, this stranger in an expensive shirt, demanding half the pension I'd earned through 42 years of waking before dawn, working through holidays, missing school events to cover shifts, all to provide for him. I looked at Amanda, with her manicured nails and judgmental eyes, who had never known a day of true hardship. A curious calm settled over me. I realized I wasn't even angry, just profoundly disappointed. And beneath that disappointment was something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. I smiled, which clearly wasn't the reaction they expected. Thomas faltered, his rehearsed speech momentarily derailed. "Dad?" he prompted. "Did you hear what we said? We need an answer." "I heard you," I said quietly. "Give me a moment to consider." I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate, stood up from the table, and said, "I'll be right back." As I walked toward my bedroom, I could hear them whispering urgently behind me. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would give in, as I always had. They had no idea what was about to happen. As I walked down the hallway to my bedroom, memories washed over me in powerful waves. Each step seemed to take me further back in time, each breath heavier with the weight of years gone by. I closed the bedroom door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed Diana and I once shared. On the nightstand, her photo smiled at me, forever 38, forever loving. I picked it up, running my thumb across the silver frame. "You should see him now, Di," I whispered. "When did we raise such a stranger?" In my mind, I traveled back to Thomas's childhood. The Christmas when he was 10, and I'd wanted so badly to buy him the new bicycle he coveted. Money was tight that year. My mother had been ill, and there were medical bills to pay. I'd sold my father's watch, the only valuable thing I owned, to see Thomas's face light up Christmas morning. I never told him what it cost me. I remembered the night Thomas had a high fever, how I'd sat by his bed for 28 straight hours, cooling his forehead with damp cloths, terrified of losing him as I'd lost his mother. I remembered working double shifts to pay for his braces, his soccer uniforms, his first car. I thought about the grueling overtime hours I'd put in to help with his college tuition, how I'd eaten ramen noodles for dinner 3 nights a week, for years to save money. The vacations I never took, the leaking roof I patched myself instead of replacing, all for Thomas's future, all so he could have opportunities I never had. Where had I gone wrong? Was it after Diana died, when my grief made me overindulge him? Was it during his teenage years, when I was too exhausted from working to set proper boundaries? Or was it in adulthood, when I'd remained silent as his sense of entitlement grew? I opened my bedside drawer and pulled out my own financial records, the ones Thomas had apparently gone through without permission. My pension wasn't nearly as generous as he seemed to believe. After 42 years of service, I received $2,300 monthly. Social Security added another $1,800. My savings, once substantial from the sale of our Portland home, had dwindled with the house purchase here and the 18 months of supporting 3 adults. If I gave Thomas and Amanda half, as they demanded, I wouldn't be able to cover my own basic expenses, let alone save for future medical costs. At 67, I was healthy, but I wasn't naive. Healthcare in America could bankrupt even the well-prepared. And adding them to the house deed, the home I'd purchased with the proceeds from selling the house Diana and I had scrimped and saved for, the only significant asset I had to my name, a different memory surfaced. Last month's retirement group meeting. My friend Frank had pulled me aside, concern etched on his weathered face. "August, you don't look good," he'd said bluntly. "You're losing weight. You seem stressed all the time. What's going on with Thomas and his wife still living with you?" I'd tried to brush it off, make excuses about family helping family. But Frank, a retired police officer who'd seen every kind of family situation, wasn't buying it. "Listen to me," he'd said, his voice low and serious. "I've seen this before. Adult children taking advantage, believing they're entitled to their parents' resources. It never ends well if you don't set boundaries." "Thomas wouldn't take advantage," I'd protested weakly. "He's just going through a rough patch." "A rough patch is 3 months," Frank had replied. 18 months is a lifestyle choice. And from what you've told me, they're not even trying to change their situation." He'd pressed a business card into my hand. "My nephew's a good lawyer. Specializes in elder rights. Keep his number just in case. I'd been offended at the time. Elder rights? I wasn't elderly, and Thomas wasn't abusing me, but I'd tucked the card into my wallet anyway. Now, sitting on my bed with Diana's photo in one hand and my financial statements in the other, Frank's words echoed in my mind. What was happening wasn't temporary hardship, it was exploitation. My son wasn't learning responsibility through my help. He was learning that taking advantage of others was acceptable. Diana would be heartbroken to see what Thomas had become. The thought of her disappointment strengthened my resolve. I reached for my wallet and pulled out Frank's nephew's card. Then I walked to my closet and removed a locked box from the top shelf. Inside were important documents: the deed to the house, my will, insurance policies, and something else I'd been working on quietly for the past month. After the incident with Diana's roses, I'd begun preparing for a confrontation I hoped would never come. I'd researched tenant laws in our state. I'd documented the changes to my home, the increasing expenses, the incursions into my privacy. I'd even taken photos of my possessions after finding some of them mysteriously missing or replaced. I hadn't wanted to believe my own son would try to take advantage of me so blatantly. I'd told myself I was being paranoid, that Thomas and Amanda would come to their senses, find jobs, move out, that we'd laugh about this difficult period someday. But their proposal tonight made their intentions crystal clear. This wasn't about temporary help during hard times. This was a calculated attempt to appropriate my assets, to secure their comfort at the expense of my security. I thought about the options before me. I could give in, as they expected. Surrender half my pension, add them to the deed, retreat to the smaller bedroom, and watch as they gradually took over what remained of my life. I could try to negotiate, offer a smaller amount, establish some boundaries. But their presumption tonight suggested they saw compromise as weakness, an opening to demand more later. Or I could stand firm. I could reclaim my home, my finances, and perhaps, in the long run, my relationship with my son. The third option was terrifying. It meant potential conflict, accusations, perhaps even a permanent rift with my only child. It meant being the bad guy who put his foot down instead of the ever-supportive father. It meant facing my deepest fear, losing Thomas completely. But as I sat there, something shifted inside me. I realized that in many ways, I'd already lost the Thomas I knew. The respectful, loving son I'd raised had been replaced by this entitled stranger. By continuing to enable his behavior, I wasn't preserving our relationship. I was destroying any chance of a healthy one. Diana had been the disciplinarian in our family, the one who believed in tough love when necessary. Sometimes loving someone means not giving them what they want, she used to say, but what they need to grow. What Thomas needed wasn't half my pension. What he needed was to find his own way, as difficult as that path might be. I gathered the documents I'd need, took a deep breath, and stood up straighter than I had in months. Looking at Diana's photo one last time, I whispered, "Wish me strength, love." Then I walked back toward the dining room, where my son and his wife waited with expectant expressions, confident in their victory. They had no idea what was coming. I returned to the dining room carrying a folder of documents and my reading glasses. Thomas and Amanda exchanged a look of confusion, clearly having expected me to return either acquiescent or emotional. My calm demeanor seemed to unsettle them. "Have you considered our proposal, Dad?" Thomas asked, his voice artificially gentle, as if speaking to someone infirm. I sat down at the table and placed my folder beside Diana's cold pot roast. "I have," I said evenly. "And before I give you my answer, I'd like to share some information with you." I opened the folder and removed several documents, arranging them neatly before me. "First, let's talk about my actual financial situation, since you've taken such an interest in it." I handed them a printed statement from my pension administrator. "My monthly pension is $2,300, not the $4,000 you've estimated on your spreadsheet. I'm not sure where you got your figures, but they're significantly inflated." Thomas frowned, glancing at Amanda. "That can't be right. The Postal Service has excellent benefits. For new employees, perhaps. My generation's benefits were more modest. And remember, I started at $18 a week back in 1973. I handed them my Social Security statement next. My Social Security benefit is $1,800 monthly. Combined with my pension, that's $4,100 gross income per month. After Medicare premiums, supplemental insurance, and taxes, it's closer to $3,500. Amanda shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence fading. Now, I continued, removing another document. Let's look at the monthly household expenses since you moved in. I placed a spreadsheet of my own on the table. Utilities have increased from an average of $240 monthly to $670. Grocery expenses have risen from $300 to nearly $800. Home maintenance costs, including the damage repair when Thomas tried to install that ceiling fan without professional help, totaled nearly $2,000 last year. I looked directly at my son. In total, household expenses have increased by approximately $1,500 monthly since you moved in 18 months ago. That's $27,000 in additional costs I've absorbed without contribution from either of you. Thomas's face reddened. We've been going through a difficult time, Dad. You know that. I do know that, I agreed, which is why I haven't mentioned these costs until now. But since we're having a family financial discussion, it seemed relevant. I pulled out another document, this one from a local property management company. I also took the liberty of researching what market rate rent would be for a situation like ours. A two-bedroom home in this neighborhood typically rents for $2,200 monthly. So your free accommodation for 18 months represents another $39,600 in support I've provided. Amanda's lips thinned. We're family, not tenants. You can't put a price on helping your son. That's true, I acknowledged. Family support shouldn't be calculated in dollars, but neither should it be taken for granted or assumed as an entitlement. I removed another sheet from my folder. I've also compiled a list of the personal items that have been disposed of without my permission. Diana's rose bushes, which were special heritage varieties, her gardening journal, my father's chess set, various pieces of furniture, family photos removed from walls. If we're itemizing value, these had both financial and sentimental worth that can't be recovered. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed, if only momentarily. Finally, I said, pulling out the last document, this is a rental agreement I had drawn up last week. I wasn't planning to use it tonight, but your proposal has forced my hand. I slid it across the table. These are my terms. You may continue living here under the following conditions. You will pay $1,000 monthly in rent, which is less than half the market rate. You will contribute an additional $500 toward utilities and groceries. You will respect my property and privacy, which means no more unauthorized disposal or rearrangement of my belongings. And you will actively seek employment, with weekly progress reports. The silence that followed was deafening. Thomas stared at the agreement as if it were written in a foreign language. Amanda's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Alternatively, I continued, my voice steady, you have 30 days to find other accommodation. I've included a list of affordable apartments within a 20-mile radius, as well as information on rental assistance programs for which you might qualify. Thomas finally found his voice. Dad, you can't be serious. We're your family. Where's this coming from? It's coming from 18 months of watching you make no effort to improve your situation. It's coming from finding my privacy invaded and my belongings disposed of. It's coming from the realization that I've been enabling behavior that isn't healthy for any of us. But what you're suggesting is impossible, Amanda protested. We can't afford rent anywhere, even with assistance. And $1,000 here? Where would we get that kind of money? The same place most adults do, I replied calmly. From employment. There are no jobs, Thomas exclaimed, his voice rising. I've been looking. I reached across the table and gently took my son's tablet. A few taps showed his browser history. According to this, You've applied for exactly 3 positions in the past month. Meanwhile, you've spent approximately 6 hours daily on gaming sites. You checked my browser history? Thomas sputtered. That's invasion of privacy. Like going through my financial statements without permission? I countered. Amanda's eyes filled with tears, a tactic I'd seen her use effectively before. I can't believe you'd do this to us. After all we've done to help improve your life, your home. I never asked for those improvements, I said quietly. I was content with my life as it was. This isn't fair, Thomas insisted, pushing back from the table. You're punishing us because we asked for reasonable support. We can negotiate. Maybe 25% of your pension instead of 50? I shook my head. This isn't a negotiation, Thomas. These are the new terms of our arrangement. You're adults in your 30s, capable of supporting yourselves. I'm offering you a chance to do so with a significant discount on housing costs, or the opportunity to find your own path elsewhere. And if we refuse? Amanda challenged, her tears suddenly dry. I met her gaze steadily. Then I'll begin formal eviction proceedings next week. I've already consulted with an attorney about my options. You'd evict your own son? Thomas looked genuinely shocked. I hope it won't come to that, I said honestly. I'm giving you choices, which is more than you offered me with your proposal tonight. We were trying to create a sustainable solution for everyone, Amanda argued. No, I corrected her gently. You were trying to secure your comfort at my expense. There's a difference. What about family loyalty? Thomas demanded. What about everything you owe me as my father? The question hung in the air between us. I considered all I'd sacrificed for Thomas over the years. The love I'd given him, the opportunities I'd created through my own deprivation. And I considered what parents truly owe their children. Not endless financial support, but guidance toward becoming self-sufficient, responsible adults. I've fulfilled my obligations to you many times over, I finally said. Now it's time for you to fulfill your obligations to yourself and to the family name I raised you to honor. I stood up from the table, gathering my documents. You have until Friday to sign the rental agreement or give me your 30-day notice. I'm going to bed now. Please clean up the dinner dishes before you turn in. As I walked away, I heard Amanda's furious whispering and Thomas's confused responses. I knew the battle wasn't over, that there would be more tears, accusations, and attempts at manipulation in the days to come. But for the first time in 18 months, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. In my bedroom, I looked at Diana's photo once more. I think I finally did it right, love, I whispered. It just took me a while to get there. The days following our confrontation were some of the most tense I've experienced since Diana passed. Thomas and Amanda cycled through various tactics, beginning with cold silence, moving to tearful pleas, then angry accusations, and finally desperate bargaining. You're heartless, Thomas declared the morning after our dinner, finding me at the kitchen table with my coffee and newspaper. Your own flesh and blood asks for help, and you respond with eviction threats. I looked up calmly. I offered 2 options, Thomas. Reasonable rent or 30 days' notice. Neither is heartless. We can't afford rent. Amanda joined in from the doorway, still in her pajamas at 11 in the morning. You know that. There's a third option you haven't considered, I suggested. Finding employment. That earned me another day of silent treatment, which, if I'm honest, came as something of a relief. By day 3, the approach changed. I found Amanda weeping dramatically at the dining table, surrounded by job search websites on her laptop. We've applied to 30 positions, she told me, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. No one's even responding. We'll end up homeless. I sat down across from her. May I see the applications? Reluctantly, she turned the screen toward me. A quick review showed that Thomas was applying exclusively for senior-level tech positions with 6-figure salaries, positions that typically required more experience than he had. Amanda's applications were similarly unrealistic, focused on high-paying marketing director roles despite her limited experience. Have you considered starting at a more junior level? I asked gently. Or looking at different industries? Retail or service work while you rebuild your careers? Amanda looked at me as if I'd suggested they consider cannibalism. We're professionals. We don't do that kind of work. I sorted mail for 42 years, I reminded her. There's dignity in all honest labor. That evening, Thomas tried a different approach, catching me alone in the garage where I was organizing my fishing tackle. "Dad," he began, his voice softer than it had been in months, "I know things have been strained. I get that we've overstayed our welcome." I continued sorting lures, waiting. "But the job market really is tough right now," he continued, "and we do need a little more time. What if we compromise? No rent for now, but we'll help more around the house. Maybe take over the yard work entirely?" I placed a spinnerbait carefully in its compartment. "The terms aren't changing, Thomas. Rent or notice by Friday." His conciliatory tone vanished. "You're being ridiculous. What kind of father treats his son this way?" "The kind who wants his son to become a self-sufficient man," I answered, meeting his eyes. "The kind your mother would have expected me to be." Bringing Diana into it was perhaps unfair, but it was also true. Thomas stormed off without another word. The next phase involved bringing in reinforcements. Thomas called his Aunt Judith, Diana's sister, who had always doted on him as her only nephew. "August," she said when she called, "Thomas tells me you're threatening to make them homeless. Surely that's not true." I explained the situation fully, including their demand for half my pension and addition to the house deed. There was a long silence on the line. "He didn't mention that part," she finally said. "That changes things considerably." "I thought it might," I replied. "Still," she continued, "they are struggling. Could you perhaps give them a bit more time? 3 months instead of 1? For Diana's sake?" It was a low blow, using Diana's memory that way. But I understood Judith meant well. "I've given them 18 months already," I said firmly. "1 more is generous." After hanging up, I received several more calls from extended family members and even a few family friends. Thomas and Amanda had clearly been working the phones, presenting themselves as victims of my cruelty. Most callers changed their tune when they heard the full story, though a few maintained I was being too harsh. "Family should help family," my cousin Robert insisted. "Your pension is just sitting there." "My pension is paying for my living expenses," I corrected him, "and will hopefully cover my medical care as I age. It's not an inexhaustible resource." By Thursday, with the Friday deadline looming, desperation set in. I came home from my weekly chess game at the community center to find Thomas and Amanda waiting for me with a new proposal written out in careful detail. "We've been thinking about what you said," Thomas began, sounding rehearsed, "about employment and responsibility." Amanda nodded eagerly. "We realize we need to contribute more." Their new offer: they would pay $500 monthly toward household expenses, half my original request. They would limit their use of utilities. They would help with chores according to a schedule. In exchange, they would remain in the master bedroom, and I would add Thomas, but not Amanda, to the house deed for inheritance purposes. "It's a fair compromise," Thomas insisted. "We all give a little." I studied the document they'd prepared, noting they'd allocated themselves 90-minute work periods 3 times weekly for household contributions, while simultaneously claiming they couldn't find time for job searching. The $500 would come from Amanda's part-time income, with no obligation for Thomas to seek work at all. "This isn't a compromise," I said, folding the paper and handing it back. "It's the same request repackaged. My terms remain unchanged." That night, I heard them arguing behind their closed door, voices rising and falling in waves of accusation and blame. I took no pleasure in their distress, but I recognized it as a necessary step toward reality. Friday morning, they were waiting for me at the kitchen table. Thomas looked defeated, Amanda resentful. "We'll take option 2, Thomas said flatly. 30 days notice." I nodded, feeling both relieved and saddened. "I think that's best for everyone." "We'll need help with the deposit for a new place," Amanda added quickly. "Family loans are normal in these situations." "I'll consider it," I said, unwilling to commit while wounds were still raw. "Depending on the place you find, and your plan for repayment. Over the next 4 weeks, a strange dance unfolded in my house. Thomas and Amanda made minimal effort to pack or search for new accommodations, seemingly convinced I would relent at the last minute. I maintained my resolve, even consulting with Frank's nephew about formal eviction procedures should they become necessary. With 10 days left in their notice period, reality finally seemed to hit. Thomas secured a position at a local electronics store, well below his previous salary but steady employment nonetheless. Amanda increased her hours at the agency. They found a one-bedroom apartment in a neighboring town, small but within their new budget. Moving day arrived with a flurry of activity and emotion. Friends of theirs arrived with a rented truck, loading boxes and furniture I didn't recognize, purchased during their stay in my home. The spare bedroom emptied. The kitchen cabinets were half cleared of specialty foods and gadgets. The cats were confined to carriers, meowing their displeasure. As the last box was carried out, Thomas paused in the doorway of what had been his childhood home. For a moment, I glimpsed uncertainty in his eyes, perhaps even regret. "Dad," he began, then stopped, seemingly at a loss for words. I waited, hoping for. What? An apology? Understanding? Some acknowledgement of what had transpired? "We'll need that loan for the security deposit," he said finally. $2,000. Disappointment washed through me, but I had prepared for this. I handed him an envelope. "Here's $1,000, I said. "It's a gift, not a loan. A fresh start." He took the envelope without meeting my eyes. "Thanks," he muttered. "Thomas," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I hope someday you'll understand this wasn't about punishing you. It was about believing you're capable of more than you've shown lately." He shrugged off my hand. "Save the life lessons, Dad. We get it. Your house, your rules. That's not what this was about," I started to explain. But Amanda appeared at his elbow, hurrying him along. "The truck is waiting," she said sharply. "We need to go." And just like that, they were gone. The house fell silent in a way it hadn't been for nearly 2 years. I walked through the rooms, noting the spaces where their presence had been, feeling both relief and a profound sadness. On the kitchen counter, I found Thomas's house key and a note. "We took the microwave. Ours broke, and you can afford a new one." One last small act of entitlement, I thought with a sigh. But also the end of a chapter that had needed closing. That evening, sitting on my back porch looking at Diana's cherry tree in the twilight, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The son I'd raised had tried to take advantage of me. Our relationship might never fully recover. There was grief in that realization, a loss as real as any death. But beneath the grief, I found something unexpected: peace. For the first time in 2 years, I was master of my own domain, captain of my own fate. The decisions before me, large and small, were mine alone to make. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. As darkness fell, my phone buzzed with a text message. I expected another demand from Thomas, or perhaps a guilt trip from a well-meaning relative. Instead, it was from Frank. "Chess tomorrow? The guys miss you." I smiled and typed back, "I'll bring the donuts." It wasn't a happy ending, not yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes that's enough. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision with family that tested your boundaries? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes the kindest thing we can do for those we love is to help them stand on their own. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength in your own family journeys.